Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Tuesday, September 19th, 2017. Time for yet another show. These things keep coming in rapid succession. So far, so good, though. Let's see. Levels are 5 privacy rooms for Kellyanne by 5 privacy rooms for Junior. Thanks, Justice. Our back behind the scenes thumbs up, A-OK. Lots happening today. Don't even really know where to start. Could go in any one of 10,000 different directions. Albert Titus tells me, is it? I don't know. I never know. When is, okay. He says it's Talk Like a Pirate Day. Is it? I don't know. It seems like every other day is Talk Like a Pirate Day. Seems an appropriate day, he says, to talk about Toys R Us, which I should. Bill in Portland, Maine mentions the same in his morning tweet. Daily Coast Radio is live right now. That's what we're telling you. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman, analyzes the impact of the Toys R Us bankruptcy on the coal industry. Really. Honestly, we could do a whole show about it. I'm not even kidding. He's not kidding either. I actually was tweeting about that this morning. I wasn't planning on going in this direction, but why not? I now need to check. Is it Talk Like a Pirate Day? I do think that that's in September, right? How come that's not springing immediately to mind when shouldn't we know Talk Like a Pirate Day? Talk Like a Pirate Day 2017. That's the first thing. Yeah, Tuesday, September 19th. God damn it. I'm never shiver me timbers or whatever. No one ever tells me about these things ahead of time. I'm running into this problem. It needs to be on the calendar, I guess. I'm running into this problem with everything. Yesterday, here's a little complaint for you. Yesterday was the third incidence of having this thing happened to me. I don't know, are they not printing calendars with holidays on them anymore? My calendar, which is, I don't know, just a generic thing that we get at the, we probably get it at Staples, which I think is also going into bankruptcy thanks to Bain Capital. I forget whether they're in bankruptcy or not. Who knows whether they are or aren't? No one knows anymore. My calendar, just an off-the-shelf thing, tells me the holidays in Mexico, in Canada. It's like a NAFTA calendar. Tells me all the holidays. It's got Secretary's Day on there, Grandparents' Day, all the things that are, let's say, third-tier holidays. Sorry, Grandpa and Grandma and secretaries out there. Or now we say Administrative Assistants Day, I think. Anyway, my calendar can't stop telling me what holidays there are. What has happened so far? Let's see. One, my kids' Boy Scout troop. I think did I mention this, that they scheduled an outing that my son wanted to go on, and it's scheduled on for a week from Saturday, which will be Yom Kippur. For those of you who either have fancy calendars or are Jewish yourselves or live in, I don't know, a country or maybe a region that has Jewish people in it, and not all of them do. That's a very big deal, holiday-wise. It's how would you express it? It's the holiest day on the year on the Jewish calendar, which I guess, in terms of its importance, I guess roughly translates to Easter for Christians. Well, it should translate to Easter for Christians. I would think that's the holiest day, but for whatever reason, in America, it's Christmas because presents, and you can give each other guns, and sometimes they're on sale, and whatever. So I don't know why they aren't emphasizing making Easter the more important of the two, but they don't, and so I don't know. Pagan gift giving wins out, and Christmas feels like it's more important, although sometimes people forget what it's all about, obviously, as well. Sometimes they think it's like the birthday of, I don't know, George Washington, and part 4th of July, part religious, I don't know. Anyway, you shouldn't be scheduling Boy Scout outings for Yom Kippur, but it doesn't always fall on a Saturday, and so it's confusing. People missed it. They were apologetic. when they realized what the mistake was. And then, I don't know. Okay, so whatever. We can forgive these things. As it turns out, he didn't want to go on the outing in the end anyway, so it's not such a bad thing. He doesn't have to miss it, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that came up in this context was my son, my older son, fortunate enough to have the good grades to be invited to apply, and I never remembered that this was the case, that you had to apply or do anything for the National Honor Society, which is very nice, something you want to do. And they're having an informational meeting of some sort before school in order to inform the kids about what they need to do in order to make this application and what they can expect from the process. The whole thing is, of course, scheduled for before school begins on Thursday, which is, of course, because you have a calendar, it's Rosh Hashanah, which is, I don't know whether I would necessarily call it the second most important date on the calendar. I don't know. Theologists could argue about whether or not it was. It's another biggie. These are the high holy days, for practitioners of the Jewish religion, and they're pretty important, and it would be days that ordinarily even a only passingly active practitioner of the religion would consider saying, all right, I really actually need to show up for services on this one. And in that respect, like Christmas and Easter, those are the days that people who have only a passing connection, perhaps, with their practice, their formalized practice of Christianity, might be expected to be most likely to show up in church. I guess you could draw the parallel that way with Judaism, and so those are the days you would show up. And up in New Jersey, growing up, where there was a pretty high concentration of Jewish residents, very often those were days off from school. In fact, the reason that they have a short work week in Congress this week is that they are likewise recognizing those holidays and taking off for them. Not so here, of course, in our school system. So if you want to be in the Honor Society, or at least you want to have a better understanding of what it takes to get into the Honor Society, you better not be a practicing Jew, because you're going to miss the whole thing. I'm sure that they'll give us some information when I call them and say, hey, this mistake has been made. They'll give us all the information that they were planning on giving us or explaining to us in this meeting, but whatever. The last incident of it, I mean, I guess I could hardly, I don't know, there's a little less blame to go around on this one. I don't know how much I should expect of these guys, but my younger son has got his Taekwondo program going on. They're having a belt test. They too have scheduled their next belt test for Saturday of Yom Kippur. And of course, even if you wanted to cheat a little bit and say, well, I'll go to services and then to my belt test, or vice versa. No, of course, they scheduled it at the same time. I don't know whether it's realistic necessarily to expect the private Korean-owned, obviously. Well, there's American-owned Taekwondo programs too, but it shouldn't surprise you that this one is Korean-American-owned. I don't know if it's on their calendars. I don't know if it's on their minds. It should be on public school minds, but it's not necessarily. So I don't know. So there's a lot we're going to be missing out on or trying to reschedule because of the upcoming Jewish holidays. What does that have to do with anything? I don't know. Oh, yes, right. It's Talk Like a Pirate Day, and I forgot, and I blame it on my calendar. So I give myself a pass, and I give everybody else a pass, too, for not knowing when holidays, real, imagined, fake, religious, otherwise, are coming up, unless you have a calendar that will tell you these things. Most people who rely on Facebook and the like probably did find out about Talk Like a Pirate Day, like Albert Titus did. You wake up and you get your news from your news feed, and everybody's talking like a pirate, and you recognize that's the case. So what else? How else can we talk like pirates? Well, my original idea for Talk Like a Pirate Day was to spend the day speaking like you were a private equity investor, because they are, after all, the biggest pirates going. And stories caught my eye this morning about just that. Although small-time pirates caught my eye too. Let's see. We'll start with the small-time ones. Here's an interesting one that I saw tweeted around this morning. Might as well know, but it's non-political, I think, unless this all stuff is being stolen by Russians, in which case that politicizes the whole thing. SparkFun has got learn.sparkfun.com. I don't know what SparkFun is. I don't know where they came from. I don't know if they're right, but here's a weird entry in the things that caught my attention this morning. Gas pump skimmers. You probably heard about this stuff that steals your credit card information when you go and buy gas at the pump with your credit card. And this particular alert, well, basically says that you can detect at least some of the latest iteration of these gas pump skimmers by checking to see whether there are Bluetooth devices available. Particularly this particular iteration of skimmer comes up as HC-05 on your as a available Bluetooth device. So if you were at the pump and you happen to have your phone on you and had your Bluetooth enabled and you opened it up and scanned to see whether there were nearby Bluetooth devices available, and HC-05 popped up, more than likely you've run into one of these new generations of skimmers. Yes, there are skimmers, plenty of them, that don't come up with that identification. But I'm guessing that if you're at a gas pump in the middle of nowhere and an HC-05 comes up, more than likely it's the skimmer, and it's not just the name of the wireless network that the gas station runs for itself. And you might want to move on and use a different pump. There's a whole description of what you can do, technically speaking, to doubly verify that you are talking to one of these skimmers. Apparently, they have they're hardwired to use that as their identifier, and the password, because these are super sophisticated hackers running these things, is 1234. And apparently, there's a way to ping it back and forth and verify that you're really looking at one of those skimmers. But I would guess if I see an HC-05 pop up, I'm out of there. But if I could remember to open my phone at the pump and look for those things, I'd be amazed. There is an Android app actually out there. Of course, it's for Android and not for iPhone, but maybe they'll come out with one. They'll have mercy on the rest of us and give iPhone users a skimmer scanner. That would be helpful. There is, there are some linked helpful explanations about how gas pump skimmers actually work and are designed. I would recommend that you take a look at that. What I really thought was interesting about the article from a policy perspective was that they point out I'll just read from the article. These skimmers are most scary because there is no one being held responsible or tasked with prevention. If your credit card number is stolen, you simply contact the provider and they will usually refund any fraudulent charges and send you a new card. In turn, the credit card companies simply do a chargeback to the gas station, taking the money from the station and refunding it to the customer whose card has been stolen. The lost revenue, usually not large enough for the gas station owners to care about, but it is really annoying as the credit card owner has to deal with all the hassle. Gas stations rarely have alarms or indicators on the pumps, so it's unclear if they ever know that pumps have been opened. That's how one of these things gets installed. They actually just physically open the thing up and put the skimmer in there to intercept the credit card information and let it process through so that you don't notice that it's being stolen. You still get your gas. But all they do is they pop the front open. And I'm sure there's a lock mechanism on them. And very often you'll find, in some places where they verify the metering and all that, they sometimes put a seal over the thing so that no one can get in there undetected. But who checks that? Anyway, there's no alarms or anything like that, so the gas station might never know if the pump has been opened up, if someone has taken a razor and slit that seal to try and make it less noticeable rather than just tearing it off. They may remove the whole thing. And when was the last time you checked to see whether there was a verified seal from the state on the calibration of the gas pumps you were using, right? Well, there's certainly no alarm bells or anything like that on the pumps. And even if there were, who knows whether they could even hear them inside. They would have to be, hooked up to something that rings inside. Anyway, gas station owners rarely, if ever, know that something's been tampered with. The fuel pump manufacturers have no incentive to install any sort of digital or audible alarms on the pump because that costs extra money and no one's going to buy those pumps. So I think, a narrow margin biz there at the gas stations. Are you, the article continues, are you angry that your card has been stolen again? Contact your local congressperson or senator and ask them to pass legislation that fines gas stations $100 or whatever for every card that's discovered on a skimmer in one of their pumps. It's ultimately up to the gas stations and pump manufacturers to secure these things. But so far, no incentive for them to do so. There's a nice, actually right in the same article. You don't even have to, click any links. If you just keep scrolling down, you'll see how skimmers work and how they're designed and all that interesting stuff. So a little technology note for you this morning. Everybody's out to screw you. It's amazing. Don't trust anybody. I'm screwing you. I'm skimming your money right now. Okay, let's see. Michael Musson says, interesting, the gas flow meter is inspected regularly by the state, but ignoring any skimmers. They might ignore skimmers. If you're getting the amount of gasoline that the meter says you're getting, they might not have any interest in anything else. So I don't know. Maybe if they detect a skimmer, maybe they're not even trained to know what they look like. They look like electronic equipment. They're supposed to be in there. I don't know. Let's see. Mad Hatter, noting for us that phases of the moon are on the calendar for all you lunar religion freaks, I guess. That is helpful. That's true. They put everything else on the calendar, but not, major religions. Mine does have Muslim holidays on it too, by the way, which is helpful in that I can see that there are holidays technically out there, but it doesn't give me any of the cultural information like this is not a serious one or this is a super important one. I can't tell the difference, but I guess we can always, at least it gives you the heads up so you can check. Bill also says that he front paged Talk Like a Pirate Day at Daily Coast this morning, so he wins the big prize, the booty, if you will, and it depends on how big a prize you're talking about, I guess. If you're, how did we get to this big booty stuff? All right. Anyway, look, the point is he was on top of the game. He front paged it. I didn't get to see it. I'm busy moving the kids out in the morning. I'm having all kinds of problems rounding up good stories for you too. Here's a personal problem. My phone will not recognize my New York Times subscription. I went out and I got one. I know you're all mad about that. I shouldn't be giving them money. They suck, etc. But I depend on them for a lot of the stories that we read you and analyze. And they mostly do a good job and they suck at some things. But that's true of almost everybody. But for whatever reason, my phone does not believe I'm a subscriber and it keeps timing me out. So, after my 10 articles. So while I skim Twitter for great stories each morning and people are sharing New York Times one, if I open the New York Times story that is linked in order to send it to Pocket, it won't open it for me. Sorry, you already read 10 articles. Do you want to log in? Yes, I want to log in. It asks me for my ID and password. I give it. It works. It gives me the bot detector thing. Press these buttons to show that you're not a bot or whatever. I do it, and then it jumps to the main New York Times page. I click on the story I wanted to read, and it kicks me back out again. So that's fun. We'll see if we can't fix that one. So if you notice a dearth of New York Times stories in our lineup, that I say is the chief reason for that. None of this is super important with respect to all the other stories we could be getting to today. I mentioned, though, that there were some other piracy-related stories out there. There are many. Let me scroll back and get to the one that started me off this morning. Let's see. how many ways are there to steal money from people? Well, there's simple ways of stealing money that I noticed, like Dr. Jennifer Gunter complaining as usual, and I'm glad that she does. I make it sound like it's a bad thing that she's complaining. She's a one-woman crusade against Gwyneth Paltrow and her Goop line of products and publications and all the weird new agey stuff that they like to sell people, some of which is just plain useless and some of which is actually possibly really medically dangerous to you, which I find interesting that they do it. I usually don't worry about it too much because rarely am I in the market, let's say, for a vaginal egg, a jade egg. This is a real product that they make, which I assume is a jade stone shaped into an egg of some size. It may be considerable. I don't know. And I'm not certain what it does. All I need to know is that it's a vaginal egg. And you can imagine what happens with one of those. It's an internal organ. So, it's got you don't just sit it next to some vaginas and connect by Bluetooth. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what the idea is here, but I'm sure it's about aligning chakras, which may or may not be real things. I don't know. And the astral vibration of the jade, and it's supposed to have health-giving benefits, and I don't know what they are, and I probably won't find out. It doesn't concern me that much. Today's complaint, though, was once again she's calling out Gwyneth for it's just too much empowerment of women, Gwyneth, and I agree with Jennifer here. You're overdoing it by empowering women to buy your psychic vampire repellent. That's the name of it. Paper Crane Apothecary puts out this product, and they're selling it over at Goop, I guess. And it's gem-infused aromatherapy psychic vampire repellent. It's a protection mist, it says, a unique and complex blend of sonically tuned gem elixirs, including black tourmaline, ruby, lapis lazuli, onyx, and garnet, oils and rosemary, juniper and lavender, and Reiki-charged crystals. No garlic whatsoever, which would be unattractive as a spray, as an aromatherapy type spray, but it's not supposed to be attractive. It's a repellent. But not all of you are psychic vampires. And I'm not clear on whether it's a psychic vampire that we're worried about, like he's not drinking your blood, he's just draining your psychic energy, or whether you're repelling real physical vampires with psychic powers thanks to this spray, as opposed to like the analog vampire repellent, which is garlic or silver or mirrors or crucifixes, if that's your thing. I have no idea what that's supposed to be. I only know that someone's selling it, and someone's taking a vacation on the money they're making selling people psychic vampire repellent. Sad, shouldn't happen, preventable, like a lot of bad things in society. But on the other hand, I doubt very much that, like for instance, that they take, WIC cards and what SNAP benefits to cover the psychic vampire repellent. In other words, they're taking money from people who could probably afford to part with it and who are probably already taking vacations on your back somehow. But anyway, you shouldn't be selling this stuff. It's not nice. Don't take advantage of people. That's a good golden rule. That's just one of the many things that's wrong with everything this morning. The other was the Axios report, somewhat widely discussed on Twitter this morning. Toys R Us, filing for bankruptcy. Bankruptcy, I guess you could call it. Toys R Us said it filed for bankruptcy late last night. That's the time you do it. That's the best time for filing bankruptcy. No one's around. It's quiet. The latest victim of a debacle suffered by brick and mortar retailers in the age of Amazon. A lot of the discussion of this story online on Twitter this morning was about the idea that there would be lots and lots of pieces like this one, at least in the start, at Axios, that lays the blame for this at the feet of retailers like Amazon taking away business share from brick and mortar businesses. And that's surely part of it. It's out there, yes. But others were emphasizing that there was probably more blame that should be laid at the feet of the private equity investors like Bain Capital, as it happens, and a couple other famous names that acquired the place and loaded it up with debt. It was the debt that killed it and pushed it into bankruptcy, they argue, more so than competition from online retailers. But it's an easier story. Online retailers, because we've all used them. If you've bought something from Amazon and avoided a trip to a brick and mortar store like Toys R Us, then you are at fault, I guess. But not really. Because more R's, as in Republicans, are probably at fault in this than just you, because you decided to buy that toy for your kid's friend's birthday party online instead of at Toys R Them. It's not us, you and I. It's the toys are really them. We should just get to that. Anyway, the company did not immediately address the fate of its 65,000 employees at its 1,700 stores, but the Wall Street Journal reported that at least some of the outlets would be closed and the format changed in others. The format is changed. That's it. Are you closing? No, we're changing formats. Well, can I see this format? No, the store won't be open at any point in the near future, ever again. That's basically what we're telling you. Okay. Well, that is a change in format. Speaking of a change in format, we have our first of 3 scheduled breaks for station identification coming up right now. I'll get back to this story and more piracy after we come back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. You know what? I've never played this file all the way to the end. I usually fade the music out. There's only 20 seconds of this music left, and it would be, if I started it earlier, and then it would fade out even earlier. I don't know if it fades at the end or it just abruptly ends. Let's find out. This is an experiment in radio for both of us together. The two of you listening, I guess, and me. 5 seconds left. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that just sort of goes away. Is that more disruptive than fading it? I don't know. It's certainly easier to do. I'll have to manipulate the file a little bit and standardize the time at which I begin playing it so that it can fade out appropriately. Okay. Well, let's see. Lots of comments came about about Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop and all that stuff. Let's see. Goop also recommends, Rebecca says that reminds me, yes, that's right, that you steam your vagina. I guess that's to help get the egg out. That might be. I don't know. I have no idea why they might do that and whether or not the egg is supposed to be in there. You do that before the egg goes in. Do you steam the egg while it's in there? Does it hard boil? I have no idea. It's made of jade. So I guess you could put a real egg in there. Well, all right. This is really where we should just leave it to the doctors to say that you don't want to steam anything. You don't want to put anything in there. I would imagine it's a bad idea all around. I don't know what their argument was for the steaming, but I don't know. Who cares? Steaming anything. You'd never get away with telling people to, men to steam their genitalia. I don't know. Do they? Who knows? I don't know. I just saw the other day somebody thank God it was in another country. I was all set to guess it was a Florida man. Got his penis stuck in a weight at, how do you do that? Right. It's like a barbell or one of the free weights that you would put on a big barbell. So it's got a hole in the middle. And he thought, there you go. That's where a penis belongs. And they had to call the fire department to come and cut him out of it, which I don't know if I want to spend any more time on this one. You would think that it would work itself out at some point, as when they say, well, the fire department's coming, unless he just really likes firemen, which is possible. I don't know. Anyway, I would say I'm going to recommend leaving this content out of the show entirely from here on in. and see if we can't just move on back to Toys R Us, which seemed so innocent when we last left off. Yeah, so they're closing all their stores, or they might close all their stores. No word on how many of their employees would be laid off, et cetera, et cetera. It's the Axios report continues on. It says, what's next? The company says it will remain open during the Christmas holidays, of which there's one, unless we're going back to the 12 days, but I get what you mean. The Christmas holiday, that is cute. You mean Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa and stuff like that? The Christmas holidays, all right. That's when they do most of their business, and they've received $3 billion in banking support to restructure itself, the company has. The company said only its U.S. and Canadian stores will be involved in the bankruptcy, and that the remainder will not be affected. I didn't even know that they had Toys R Us stores elsewhere, but I guess it stands to reason. Why not? Okay. First, though, it notes that it drove others out of business. Over the years, Toys R Us became the largest store in the United States with low prices that killed stylish independents like FAO Schwarz and KB Toys, both of which themselves filed for bankruptcy because kids hate toys, you see. Online competition from Amazon, in addition to discount pricing at stores like Walmart and Target, undercut the retailer, who also was severely hampered by more than $5 billion in debt on its balance sheet. Why? Because of all the toys they purchased? Nah, not really. It was related to the company's acquisition by private equity firms Bain Capital and KKR in 2005, back when Mitt Romney, I guess, was still running the place and still pirating people. But, that prompted me to think about the fact that, golly, we need to cut taxes on the investor class. Look at all the jobs created here by the investor class, and how many more could have been created by just cutting their taxes a little bit more. 65,000 employees stand to lose their jobs. 1,700 stores stand to close because, I don't know what, we didn't cut their taxes enough. Reminder from longtime listeners, possibly will remember, but certainly observers of the 2012 election will remember what Bain Capital and venture capital or private equity firms like them were really all about: acquiring companies, sometimes already troubled companies, and not because Bain Capital or Mitt Romney wanted to play Santa Claus and be the people with the most toys. They buy companies because companies are going concerns, and they have lots of capital amassed, and they have all sorts of assets. And what you can do, like mining coal, is you buy land, not because you want to build a house on it, not because you want to preserve it for a nature reserve, not because you want to grow crops on it, but because you want to tear it apart and dig up what's underneath it, crush it, and sell it for a profit. That's called mining. We don't think mining is such a bad thing necessarily, but it's no fun for the environment, certainly, but that's what it is. It's an extractive industry. And all they do is mine capital out of corporations that they acquire. You buy a company, it's got assets. How many of those assets can be liquidated and turned into cash that I will now give out to the investors? Why do they get the money? Because, I don't know, they're investors. They gave us cash, so we should give them cash. That's just sort of the entire purpose of investing in anything. They want to get money back from their investment. That's the point of investing, and you should remember that investors don't create jobs. They might accidentally or incidentally, to their purpose, create jobs. Old-fashioned investors will tell you, you got to spend money to make money, right? You've heard that one. People used to say that all the time. And that meant you got to invest in a business. You got to build it and spend money on wages and infrastructure and assets of all sorts. And then later on down the road, that spending will produce profits that you can then distribute to people. You have now spent money to make money. But the reality is everybody lives and dies by quarterly reports. There's no waiting anymore. There's no patience involved in investing anymore. You buy a company so that you can disassemble it if it has a retirement benefits plan with an account of some amount of money in it or invested on behalf of future retirees of the company. You dismantle it. You sell off those assets and you turn it into cash. And when you have cash, the law says, the law enables you to do this. And I should say MBA culture and economics, the way it's currently taught in business schools, says you got to give that money to the investors. That's the point of investment, that shareholders deserve that money back, that increasing shareholder value is the top priority. Forget about all the people who work for you. Remember that to an investor who's put money in the hopes of taking even more money out, wages are waste. They don't create jobs because wages are waste. If you put money in, you expect that money and more to come out and come to you, not to someone else who's working at the company. They didn't put any money in. They only put in their blood, sweat, and tears and time away from their families and other worldly pursuits which they might prefer to be doing. It's only opportunity costs that they're investing in the company. You invested cash or maybe Bitcoin. So you deserve more money. Why do you deserve more money? Because we are capitalists in this country. It's what we do. Capital. That's the fun stuff. It's so good. If you put capital into a business, you deserve capital plus a little more capital from out of the company. If you put labor, sweat, blood, maybe, tears, probably, time, effort, energy into the company, you deserve either jack squat, which is a distinct possibility in many cases, or, I don't know, whatever we agreed to give you, minus whatever we can force you to give back to us by threatening not to give you what we agreed to give you. That's what you get. Labor gets X, capital gets X plus Y, because that's the way it works. Why? I don't know. We've kind of discussed that on the show too. Maybe there is some inherent superiority to capital. It's easier to move. It's easier to convert into something else. If you are highly skilled and trained in making automobiles and your automobile plant closes, is it necessarily the case that you can transfer those skills to manufacturing, I don't know, Big Mouth Billy Bass? Possibly. Maybe. Do people still make those? I don't know. They're probably made in China anyway. The point is, it might or might not be easily convertible into this new thing. It's certainly more difficult to imagine it being, well, you know, healthcare is a growing industry, right? Why don't you be a surgeon? Well, it's not really translatable. But the capital is. You can take the money that was once invested in the auto plant and say, I instead want to convert this capital into a Big Mouth Billy Bass factory, a ShamWow factory, what was the name of the footy pajama blanket thing that was so hot for a while? A Bump It factory, a Jade vagina egg factory, any of those things. A Goop website, for that matter. It's easy to convert. And now that ease with which it can be converted into anything else you want, including a swimming pool for your own family and a vacation, a private jet, whatever, that's nice. Does it deserve additional reward? It seems to me that it is its own reward, but apparently we need to reward it even more. And I guess maybe that's to incentivize people from into spending it on putting money into the kinds of efforts that might actually possibly result somehow accidentally in a job being created for someone else, as opposed to another private jet, ivory back scratcher, swimming pool for your backyard, whatever. But that's how we do in this country, and it's not good, and we don't recognize it yet. So for whatever reason, there will probably be a lot less discussion about whether or not it's wise to not only allow but continue to overly incentivize people who already have plenty of money to put it into efforts to extract money from things that are kind of sort of working, even if they're not going gangbusters, and loading it up with so much debt that voila, poof, you're gone. The jobs are gone. And you can point to Amazon and say, it wasn't our loading you up with debt and stealing all your money, because we're pirates. Talk like a pirate day once again. But rather technology that puts you out of business. You see, times are changing, Toys R Us employees. And there's just no more call for gigantic brick and mortar box retailer stores where you stand around in a standard issue uniform vest type thing and open up your warehouse to others and sell them the products that we've imported from overseas at low prices. Unless, of course, you're counting the world's largest retailer, which does exactly that, across the street. Well, that can't be it, right? So is it Amazon that's putting everybody out of business? I don't know. Maybe not. But $5 billion in debt loaded onto it by the people who buy it to save it, right? We're business geniuses. That's how we make our money over here at Bain. Why are you buying brick and mortar stores in an age where brick and mortar stores are going down the toilet all the time? Because we're business geniuses. We're going to turn it around. We're going to save it from bankruptcy and save those jobs, when in reality they are psychic vampires to those jobs. We ought to be spraying them with that stuff. Maybe if that works, we won't have all of our companies bought out by private equity firms that divide it up into small parts and give it out to the investors who are creating jobs. I don't know. That one's got me kind of annoyed out there, but it seems to be a pattern. They keep destroying everything they buy. That is weird. No one seems to notice at the moment, though. So anyway, I also did see something that flew by this morning that I took note of, didn't put aside, and now I can't find it tweet-wise. And it was a nice chart that once again illustrated, I didn't put it aside because it illustrated a point that we have been on, we've gone over it 100 times. The slide, the consistent slide, falling off a cliff really, of the share of profits that labor is able to take out of the productivity of American business. And I don't remember what the span of the chart was, but it illustrated basically over some number of decades how 60% of the profit and the money being generated by American productivity of any kind was going to the people who created that productivity with their hands, directly made that productivity, versus then we spent the last couple of decades redefining how productivity happens. And it became less and less about the hands of the people who did the things and more about the capital which bought the buildings in which people would use those hands and create that. And all of a sudden, we got to maximize shareholder value. More and more people learned that way, and it justified more and more extraction from the companies until at the end of this chart, it was somewhere down in the 35 to 40% range of the profits from productivity going to the people who handmade, artisanally, that productivity. And the rest of the money was going to the people who paid the rent on the buildings, etc., or whatever else that was that they did to administer these things. Sometimes they didn't even do that, but investors were taking the money out of this, and that was piratical in its own right. But if anybody saw that chart, maybe you could pick it up and retweet it my way so that we can include it. But it won't tell you anything you didn't already know. It will just put some specific numbers on these things. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting way to get into a subject I did not know that we were going to enter into today. But it being Talk Like a Pirate Day, I guess we ought to do that. So I don't know. So the whole thing struck me as odd that 65,000 Toys R Us jobs were now at risk because of all the money we agreed to give to people to create jobs by investing in places like this. And now they were making off with all the money. And if you do think because there is some validity to it, that it is Amazon or the changing nature of technology, and people just aren't going to brick and mortar stores anymore, and they're ordering online, or they're buying everything they need at mega super Walmart centers and things like that. It's just a change in the culture. I'm sorry, Toys R Us jobs are just not coming back. So I thought, well, I better let the coal miners know about that, because they'll appreciate having being given the truth about their situation. Coal's just not coming back. But, oh, no, wait a minute. No, the coal thing is happening because there's a war on coal. There's no war on toys. That's not something that you should, worry yourself about. Besides which, coal miners are on our side over here because they love the investor class. Because one, we create coal mining jobs. We don't. And two, we love to pay people for the coal mining that they do, which we also don't. Once again, paying wages is waste. If you own a coal mine or invest in the coal mine, you want cash from the coal mine paid to you for having bravely given some of your money that you had lying around available to risk on such ventures. You gave them some of their money so that they could, buy, I don't know, hats with lights on them and pickaxes and little carts that they use like in the cartoons. I'm sure they use other things now in real live coal mines. And then those people could go down there, those guys, those people that we hire for a little while, they get a disease and then they die. And then we have to hire their children to do the same if they're not addicted to opiates or meth, or even if they are, so long as they agree to only use them at home after being injured on the job. It's okay. We can send them down there. One of the things you might want to do about making more money is they keep asking for more money every time they chip, bring all the coal out, right? So sometimes you have to give them the money. One of the ways to make that money back as an investor is to take down that expensive alarm system that you're paying X amount per month for, or don't even put it in there. Really, honestly, how much does it cost if gas escapes into the mine and either suffocates or blows up your miners? The answer is, why are you even trying to calculate it? I'm creating more jobs. Every time I kill a coal miner, that's another job that's available at no net loss to me. This is fantastic. Creating jobs. It's a cycle that feeds on itself. And these people keep procreating and having more children. That means more miners. If it was difficult to get miners, that would be one thing. We could get them in from overseas possibly, and but that would make them immigrants. But there are certain kind of immigrants we're okay with, like ones we hide underground and kill very quickly. That would probably go over huge with Republicans. It might even work for a while, but it's a highly exploitative industry. Capitalism is what I'm saying. It's getting a little radical in here. Phew, I have to turn down the temperature. Okay, what other things can we discuss? Some of which are piratical, some of which are not. We can get closer to the day's headlines, because if we don't, the after show is just going to go bonkers. They're not going to have any time to cover all of these stories. There are lots out there. Here's a pirate, Eric Trump. This is a new development in the Trump, the money laundering side, not the foreign money laundering, but the domestic money laundering. There's foreign emoluments and domestic emoluments. There's foreign money laundering and domestic money laundering. Eric Trump's old foundation apparently back at it. Forbes has this story. We'll see if they let us into the site at this point. We got to click through a couple of things to let the businessmen who know what they're doing know that we want to read their story. Eric Trump's old foundation apparently held secret event at Trump-owned golf club. Do you remember that Eric had a charitable foundation, which he changed the name of because he was super embarrassed about being charitable, I guess. The charity formerly known as the Eric Trump Foundation, now known as Curativity. They do some good work. The charity itself is a good idea. They funded St. Jude Children's Research Hospitals. Those are good things. We like those. The problem with them was that Dad got involved and turned it into a self-dealing operation. That's money laundering of a sort. by saying he had a good thing going. They would do a charity golf tournament, and people pay money to join and play in the charitable golf tournaments. And, some of the money gets spent on running the charitable golf tournament. The rest of it goes to the charity that helps St. Jude's Children's Hospitals. Good thing, right? One of the things a charity golf tournament has to do, of course, is procure the use of a golf course for its golf tournament. And then sometimes they buy some prizes and some food and things like that. There's overhead. But the good news was that Eric Trump's father owned a lot of golf courses. So they would have less overhead because you don't have to pay the golf course. And at some point in all of this nonsense, Donald Trump was insisting that Eric Trump, and then Eric Trump in turn would insist that the good news was, since we own golf courses, we don't have to pay. It's 100% free of charge, he used to say, to use the Trump golf courses for this charity event. But Donald Trump changed a lot of that. You remember the story about the Eric Trump Foundation and how it started out with a board of directors that was full of his siblings were on it, but it was a lot of his friends, Eric Trump's friends. And they knew how, they had some general idea about how to operate a charity. You don't want to run up the overhead. You want as much of the money that's collected to go to the charity as possible. And they ran it fairly decently. And at some point, Donald Trump began to insist, for some unknown reason, because he wanted to steal money. That's the reason, that Eric Trump replaced the friends that he had on the board with Donald's friends and business associates, etc. And lo and behold, they began to vote on things that were a little bit different, like the fact that it sucked that they used the golf course for free. They should really be looking into how can they pay to use a golf course owned by Eric's dad in order to hold their event. That way, the Donald Trump organization could make money by renting out this golf course. They would otherwise be, collecting greens fees from 6, 10, 15 different people who wanted to play that day. So you got to pay them some money. So, that sucks. This is a charity. One of the main benefits of this charity was we didn't have to pay for the golf course. We had lots of money left over to give to the hospital. Don't worry about it, Eric. Donald and Donald's friend said. The point is that, we'll help make up the difference. The Donald J. Trump Foundation, filled with money from other people other than Donald Trump, will give a big donation to the Eric Trump Foundation to make up for that money. By make up for that money, meaning this: if I give you, or rather, if I charge you $100,000 to use the golf course for your charity, let's say you're running that charity and you don't want $100,000 to be taken out of the bank account and given to Donald Trump. Well, what about if I offered you this? If I gave you $100,000, would you be okay with then taking that $100,000 and giving it to the golf course so that you would have paid to use the golf course, as the golf course now requires of you, and it's no skin off your nose because I give you the $100,000? To Eric Trump, that makes a certain amount of sense. Okay, $100,000 comes in, $100,000 goes out. That's net zero. I'm okay with that. Never stopped to think that whose $100,000 is that? That's other people's $100,000 that they gave to the Donald J. Trump Foundation, because the Donald J. Trump Foundation was supposed to be a charitable organization and use that money for charity. Well, I am using it for charity. I'm giving it to the Eric Trump Foundation, which is a charity. Right? Does that not make a certain amount of sense? Okay, well then what happens to that money? Well, that money goes to the Trump golf course, the Trump organization. That's just corporate profit, which means that Donald Trump gets to keep some, or maybe even all, of that money. So what actually happens here, though, if you put the whole story together, is it's self-dealing, right? People give Donald J. Trump's foundation money and deduct it from their taxes because that's a charitable organization. I'm giving it to a charity, the Donald J. Trump Foundation. The Donald J. Trump Foundation can't simply say, thank you for that $100,000, sucker, and keep it. That's a problem. That's illegal. Right? I guess it would mean that the Donald J. Trump Foundation would lose its tax-exempt status as a charity. So instead, it takes the money and says, the purpose of this money is to give it to charity. Here's a charity over here. It's the Eric Trump Foundation, but who cares, right? Because I'm giving it to another charity. Yes, it's the charity of a relative, but they're going to do charitable things with it, right? Presumably. Just don't look at what they do with it. I give the $100,000 to Eric Trump Foundation. Eric Trump hands it over to the Trump organization to pay for. It's a legal, legitimate piece of overhead here. I got to rent the golf course to have a charity golf tournament. Granted, I'm renting my father's golf course, which he could have given to me for free. He used to give to me for free. But the point is, it's a legal arm's length transaction. It isn't, because they're family, but whatever. And then the Donald J. Trump organization keeps this money, but that money was just 2 seconds ago charitable donations that Donald Trump wasn't allowed to pocket. Now, by moving it from the Donald J. Trump Foundation to the Eric Trump Foundation, and then from the Eric Trump Foundation to the Trump Organization, it now becomes money that Donald gets to keep. He couldn't access it when it was in the coffers of the Donald J. Trump Foundation, and he can access it now that it's in the coffers of the Trump Organization. Magic, or as we like to call it, money laundering. They're back in the news for that, and they were in trouble for it before. It's about time for our music here so that it fades out at the proper time. They're back in trouble for it. This was something that apparently both the Donald J. Trump Foundation and the Eric Trump Foundation were under review by the New York Attorney General, and they weren't supposed to be doing any more of this activity. But I'll tell you what they were doing after this break. We are back now from one of the shorter breaks for station identification here on the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. This is the one where we actually have to work manually to fade out the music until I edit down a 1-minute version of this thing instead. Otherwise, this thing goes for another minute and a half into the show, and that's just not going to work. When we last left off, we were discussing the Eric Trump Foundation and the latest problems with it. We might as well get right to those. The New York Attorney General was investigating both the Eric Trump Foundation and the Donald J. Trump Foundation, and I thought it had been left at, listen, it is not certain that you guys are going to be able to keep your charitable foundation status. No more charity work at the moment for either of these two foundations until we can sort out what the hell's going on here. It's a travel ban, a Muslim ban on your money until we can figure out what the hell's going on here. The charity, though, renamed Curativity, so what the hell? And we can go ahead. It's got a new name. You said the Eric Trump Foundation couldn't do anything. This is Curativity. Apparently that made sense to Eric because, I don't know. It says here, though, that the charity is legally allowed to raise money as the investigation continues, but its choice of venue seemed to be an act of defiance. I think the Donald J. Trump Foundation had to stop its disbursements, but that was because they really suspected so much of what it was dispersing was just going into Donald Trump's pocket. They weren't so sure about Eric Trump's thing or what. I don't know exactly what they didn't shut it down out of hand. They were allowed to raise money. But there are so many ways that they could raise money, even though their thing is an annual charity golf tournament. As it turns out, there are golf clubs and golf courses that the Trump family doesn't own, but that you might even be able to rent for considerably less than the Trump organization's golf courses. But yet the point is that there are actually golf courses all over the place, and they could have used any of them, but they didn't. Under investigation, they did change their name, but did nonetheless rent out the same damn Trump golf course that they've always done that has gotten them investigated in the first place. And then they tried to hold the event in secret so we wouldn't find out about it. That didn't work very well. I mentioned its choice of venue seemed to be an act of defiance. That's where we left off on this Forbes article. Dan Alexander, the reporter on this one, by the way, well worth mentioning his name because apparently he couldn't get into the Westchester, New York golf club where they were holding the event. And yesterday was tweeting a picture of the security guy at the Westchester golf course holding a picture of Dan Alexander, having been given that picture in order specifically to keep Dan Alexander out of that club so that he couldn't cover this story. But here it is. So where did they, what was this act of defiance? Eric Trump had previously falsely stated that his charity got to use his family's assets 100% free of charge. But a June story in Forbes magazine debunked that claim and sparked a state investigation into the organization. It is not clear who will cover the costs for Monday's event. It was Monday. The Eric Trump Foundation traditionally held its invitational on the same day, the third Monday of September. So it's tradition and you can't change it. Other aspects of the event seem to be deliberate copies of prior Eric Trump Foundation invitationals. Signs along one tee box, viewed from just off the course premises, because he's not allowed on them, appeared to include a logo of both Curativity and St. Jude's Children's Hospital. For years, the Eric Trump Foundation promised donors that its money would go to the cancer hospital, and it did indeed raise more than $11 million for St. Jude. That was the good side of things. But it also sent more than $500,000 to about 40 other charities. Relevant donors whose money was given to causes other than St. Jude were made aware that the funds would be donated elsewhere, a foundation spokesperson wrote in a June email to Forbes. That doesn't seem bad either. The ambiance also resembled prior year's events. Players walked the cart paths puffing cigar smoke as music blared from speakers and sponsored tents greeted attendees at the tee box. It's basically that event, the same old event, said a security guard patrolling the perimeter of the golf course when asked whether it was a Curativity event. It's a private thing. Others at the club were more hesitant to disclose the purpose of the event. When Forbes approached the main entrance, which is protected by a small hut, a different security guard motioned for the car to stop. Informed that the driver was a journalist from Forbes, he retreated into the hut to grab a photograph of this reporter, then denied access to the club. They said, "You got to leave." The security guard said, "They'll all be looking. You have pictures all over town up here. If you try to park and go up there, they'll be tackling you," he added with a friendly chuckle. Forbes did approach the golf course from one of its sides. When asked about the purpose of the event he was attending, one golf cart passenger responded, "Private event, bud. I have no idea. It's private, and I have no idea what it is." When pressed as to why he was there, the attendee responded, "Just hanging out," before adding, "Private private event. Hide behind that a lot. And it's legit, though. A few images of the event spilled out onto social media. An Instagram user named Gabrielle Agnel, who appears to work for a local sound company, posted 2 photos at the Trump Golf Club. The second one included the caption, #EventDay, #corporate_AV, and #Curativity. Lots of hashtags. Another Instagram user, Eddie Guerra, who describes himself as the marketing director for Gurkha Cigars, posted 2 stories tagged to the Trump course on Monday morning. Gurkha Cigars had previously sponsored the Eric Trump Foundation Golf Invitational. Second Instagram post showed a zoomed-in shot featuring a Gurkha logo alongside one of the tee boxes. A telecom company named ACN, which had also previously sponsored the Eric Trump Foundation tournament, displayed a sign with a logo on another part of the course, which was visible from just off the club property. Eric Trump and spokespeople for the Eric Trump Foundation did not respond to requests for comment. The person answering the phone at Trump National Golf Club did not answer questions about whether the club was hosting a Curativity event, but said that the general manager, Brian Lynch, would call back. He did not. End of story. It's not a huge scandal or anything, but it's once again, even the New York Attorney General saying, listen, you got to be on the up and up here. You're under investigation. Under investigation, they still went back to the same tried and true formula. Why? Because that's how money moves in this family. They love to launder dough. So they do it, even when they're warned not to. Lots of things that they do, even though they're warned not to. For instance, let's go over to CNN. This was an exclusive last night, but by now everybody's got this story, and we could probably pick up even more details. But last night, the exclusive that Evan Perez and, Shimon Prokupich, I'm guessing, and Pamela Brown jointly reported for CNN. Listen, they're going to play it for you. Wow. You know what? There's no way for me to... this is an interesting problem I'm having. You heard that even though it's not being played on the computer that's actually broadcasting the show right now. It's on the laptop, which used to broadcast the show. But since we installed Wiretap or not Wiretap, but Loopback, you remember the infamous Loopback that's on both the computer, the Mac Mini running the show, and the laptop that used to run the show, there's like no volume control left on this thing. So you gotta like mute that tab in Firefox to stop the speakers from blasting it out loud enough that the microphone picks it up. I used to be able to just turn down the volume on the thing, but Loopback hijacked that like a month ago, and it's not giving it back. Anyway, the exclusive reported yesterday was that the U.S. government wiretapped former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. That's what everybody was talking about. And it's true, they did it. And now the Trump guys are out there saying vindication, which is amazing. Like, why would that be vindication? Because, of course, remember when Trump said they wiretapped Trump Tower, Obama did, in order to try to politically screw me over. Now, of course, that part isn't true, but I guess it's possible now that you could say, although we always conceded that this was the case, even at the time when Trump was being upbraided by much of the mainstream traditional media for saying without basis that Trump Tower had been wiretapped. We were saying, oh, it's entirely likely that there are wiretaps, and many of them, in Trump Tower, but that's because Trump Tower is filled with foreign agents and gangsters who are the rightful targets of legal wiretaps ordered by judges and magistrates all over the place, both under FISA warrants because of all the foreign agents involved, and under, I'm sure, ongoing RICO investigations because of all the mobsters who are living in Trump Tower. Trump Tower is I almost went completely off the rails here, is an effing sewer. I'm telling you, it's full of criminal activity. I promise you. Crack it open like a nut. Nothing will... arrest people at random, basically, in Trump Tower. You'll find something, even if it's only tax evasion, in every apartment. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about Paul Manafort. U.S. investigators wiretapped former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort under secret court orders before and after the election, amazingly. Sources tell CNN an extraordinary step involving a high-ranking campaign official now at the center of the Russia meddling probe. Is that it? If you stop there, you'll come away susceptible to the Donald Trump claim that, see, they were wiretapping me to try to steal my campaign secrets in order to beat me at the polls. Not what was happening. Manafort was under investigation because he was essentially an unregistered foreign agent for years prior to his management of Trump's campaign, and remained so even after his management of Trump's campaign. Secret court orders? Secret, yes, because FISA. Court orders, yes, because you have to actually come before a court and say, we have sufficient evidence available to prove that it's very likely that some sort of national security crime could be happening here, and we have to check it out. The government, they continued snooping until early this year, including a period when Manafort was known to talk to President Donald Trump, which probably means that Trump gets picked up incidentally in some of these recorded conversations as well. Some of the intelligence collected includes communications that sparked concerns among investigators that Manafort had encouraged the Russians to help with the campaign, according to 3 sources familiar with the investigation. 2 of these sources, however, cautioned that the evidence is not conclusive, though you should probably consider it in light of the fact that when Russians finally actually physically showed up at Trump Tower to make their case about helping the Trump campaign, Manafort was on the scene, taking notes, apparently, amazingly enough. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team, which is leading the investigation into Russia's involvement in the election, has been provided details of these communications. A secret order authorized by the court that handles the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, began after Manafort became the subject of an FBI investigation that began in 2014. Yeah. It centered on work done by a group of Washington consulting firms for Ukraine's former ruling party, the sources told CNN. The surveillance was discontinued at some point last year for lack of evidence, according to one of the sources. The FBI then restarted the surveillance after obtaining a new FISA warrant that extended at least into early this year. Sources say the second warrant was part of the FBI's efforts to investigate ties between Trump campaign associates and suspected Russian operatives, of which there were like 1 billion. Such warrants require the approval of top Justice Department and FBI officials, and the FBI must provide the court with information showing suspicion that the subject of the warrant may be acting as an agent of a foreign power. Now, we got that going on all over the place here. Both Michael Flynn's are under suspicion for doing exactly that. It's unclear when the new warrant started. The FBI interest deepened last fall because of intercepted communications between Manafort and suspected Russian operatives, who would have been under wiretap regardless of whether they were listening to Manafort himself, and among the Russians themselves that reignited their interest in Manafort, the sources told CNN. As a part of the FISA warrant, CNN has learned that earlier this year, the FBI conducted a search of a storage facility belonging to Manafort. It's not known what they found. Conversations between Manafort and Trump continued after the president took office, long after the FBI investigation into Manafort was publicly known, the sources told CNN. They went on until lawyers for the president and Manafort insisted that they stop, according to the sources. What's amazing is that the lawyers who insisted that they stop were, of course, just overheard blabbing about the case in a steakhouse next to the New York Times building. These guys can't remember from 1 minute to the next what they're advising people. So it's unclear whether Trump himself was picked up on the surveillance, but it's probably true. Once again, what this means is that the FBI said, all right, listen, everybody. They publicly acknowledged an investigation into Manafort, which probably meant they were listening to his phone calls since he was being investigated for being an unregistered foreign agent and talking to foreign agents that they would have been legally able to wiretap without a warrant under FISA. And Donald Trump still said, I'm still going to call and discuss strategic details with you. I don't care. He may have been going for some sort of martyrdom, but I doubt it. He's just not security conscious. Speaking about North Korean missile launches on the veranda at Mar-a-Lago, for instance, in front of the waiters, having people with their spying apps and flashlights on their camera phones, looking over his shoulder at classified documents and possibly beaming those images directly to servers in China, whatever. Not to mention the steakhouse conversations and everything else about how terrible he is at operational security in the Trump administration and Trump himself. Manafort previously had denied that he ever knowingly communicated with Russian intelligence operatives during the election and also denied participating in any Russian efforts to undermine the interests of the United States. We could skip down quickly to the origins of the FBI's interest in Manafort, although I do see some really interesting things going on. I guess Trump is finally giving his speech in front of the UN, which is a joke in and of itself, but I'm curious about the content of the speech, but we'll probably end up reviewing that tomorrow. It looks like they have him properly tranquilized and he hasn't said anything horrific yet, but I'm not really sure. I can't follow both of those stories all that easily at the same time. The FBI, back to Manafort, their interest in Manafort dates back to at least 2014, partly as an outgrowth of the U.S. investigation into Viktor Yanukovych, the former Ukrainian president whose pro-Russian regime was ousted amid street protests, which no doubt the Russians thought we started using social media. Yanukovych's Party of Regions was accused of corruption, and Ukrainian authorities claimed he squirreled millions of dollars out of the country. By the way, you squirrel it out of the country if you keep it yourself. You invest it abroad if you buy apartments in Mos Eisley Trump world, whether that's apartments in Trump Tower or elsewhere around Manhattan or elsewhere in the United States. Kind of weird. Speaking of which, I guess you could merge the two stories by noting that yesterday at comments prior to his UN speech, but still as part of the big UN event going on, I noticed that The Hill reported on this one that Trump begins first UN remarks made yesterday by mentioning his nearby building. I thought that was pretty amazing. President Trump began his first comments at the UN as commander-in-chief by mentioning one of his buildings near the UN headquarters. After thanking the audience, Trump went on to explain the potential, quote-unquote potential, he saw in the building project, which sits across the street. And you could just picture his mind wandering off. The world is gathered to hear what the leader of the free world has to say about the direction of America and vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And what are we going to do about all these nuclear missiles, being threatened? There's missile tests going on in North Korea. By the way, I did happen across somebody on Twitter this morning who was pretty sure that it wasn't necessarily global warming that was creating all these terrible hurricanes, but all the nuclear warheads that Koreans were lobbing into the Pacific were what? Okay. But she insisted that she was right. Anyway, you see how things happen like this, how a mind can wander in the middle of these conversations. It happened to me, it can happen to Donald Trump. That's why he probably does a great me imitation. I actually saw great potential right across the street, to be honest with you. And it was only for the reason that the United Nations was here that turned out to be such a successful project, Trump said. In other words, he's right about that. Making a Trump building here at this spot doesn't necessarily lead to success. In fact, it usually leads to disaster. But because the UN was nearby and there are lots of foreign governments and foreign government representatives looking for convenient quarters, either for the staff that was working at the UN or for the consulates that would be running operations on behalf of their individual countries at the UN. They needed some swanky digs. This was right here. Lots of international contingents, let's say, find the Trump aesthetic attractive and pleasing. And so they bought in. And it's only because the United Nations, that's the way he can praise the United Nations. Otherwise, he can't stand the United Nations. He's tweeted about how he thinks it's so ugly and cheap and the building is horrible. I would be able to put up beautiful slabs of marble behind the speaker instead of those cheap tiles that they have, which actually look like fairly expensive stone, but maybe they're not. I don't know. Maybe they saved a lot of money putting in cheap tiles. But yeah, this is his only compliment for the UN is I was able to sell a lot of units for top dollar. These people were loaded, and I made a lot of money. I'll be honest with you, selling units in the Trump World Tower across the street. This would not have happened unless a large collection of lovers of ticky-tack schlock had been concentrated here by the international community. And I thank you for doing that, because otherwise on the American market, this piece of crap, who knows how long it would have taken to sell out. But because I was able to sell it to governments, which don't care at all about how much money they spend. We all know this, right? We all know that. And also oil sheiks from Middle Eastern countries and fabulously wealthy people, because let's face it, who's going to be sent to the United Nations to represent their country other than the fabulously wealthy? There are poor countries, communist types that send poor people to try to shame the rest of us with some kind of moral message. But okay, so fine, whatever. They live in flop houses nearby. The rich people who run the world needed a fancy place to live. So I built it, and I want to thank the United Nations for being so chock full of money that they could afford to just shell it out for the schlock that I'm slinging just across the street. Thank you very much. That's the best compliment he can give to the UN. Keep the peace, give a forum for people to talk with one another, et cetera. So there's some terrible things that go on there as well, like any other organization. I don't know if I would necessarily say terrible, but there's some things that aren't so helpful, I'm sure, that go on. But that's his interest in it. The UN is great because it brings together lots of people who need apartments in one place. And I have built an apartment building in that place. So that's great. Well done. Okay. I had just I went off to this one so I could do a Trump imitation, but I left behind the CNN story about the wiretapping of Manafort. But I do feel like we knew all of this already. I guess this is the first public acknowledgement of the timeline and the renewal of the warrant and the raising the possibility that Manafort spoke on tape with Trump at some point. Lordy, I hope there are tapes, right? So I don't know if we learned anything else new from the CNN story, but I'm sure there are a lot more things that we probably ought to add to this, and we'll have to wait and see how the CNN appearance goes and whether he insults anybody in any particular manner, and check in on that all again. Let's see. There's a number of other interesting stories to bring up. Let me just skim through. Yes. Right. You remember that when we left off yesterday, the Republicans in Congress were getting ready to steal away health care from not 24 million people as Mitch McConnell originally planned, but now 32 million people with the new Cassidy-Graham, or sometimes known as Graham-Cassidy bill that was sketched out on the back of a napkin last week. We discussed the fact that there would be time for near zero in the way of hearings on this thing. They're going to have, I think, 2 show hearings on it. But here's an interesting new twist. Of course, we all know that they're racing against the clock because the parliamentarian has decided, for whatever reason, that the reconciliation instructions under which Cassidy-Graham could pass with just 50 votes in the Senate is expiring with the end of the fiscal year, September 30th. But here's a new thing. Dylan Scott was tweeting in the middle of the day yesterday. A few lobbyists now have pointed out that there is only 90 seconds of debate time left for Cassidy-Graham. I don't think I have seen, I'm sure it's been clarified in print articles, long-form print articles by now. I didn't put one aside. I should try and grab one to see if I can confirm what they're talking about here. But it appears that because they're bringing Cassidy-Graham or Graham-Cassidy under reconciliation, what we have here is this situation. As you know, reconciliation is favored for the passage of this bill by Republicans because it is protected from filibuster. Once again, the mechanics count. Why is it protected from filibuster? Because reconciliation bills, by law, by statute, are time limited for debate. So if there's a statutory time limit for debate, there's no way to filibuster it, extend the debate on it, and prevent the invocation of cloture to close debate on it. It doesn't matter. 20 hours, as I recall, is what's allowed for a reconciliation bill to be debated. Well, what's happening here, of course, is that Cassidy-Graham is really just a substitute for the entire text of the McConnell version of Affordable Care Act repeal and replace that they debated earlier. In other words, we're still stuck under the same 20-hour time limit. It's not a different bill per se. It's the same reconciliation procedure that's been allotted to us. And what may end up happening here is that the only debate time left, I don't know whether they really left 90 seconds on the clock per se during the last go-round of debate on the McConnell version of the bill, or whether that's just when you bring up an amendment and time has run out, that might be like the vote-a-rama amount of time that you're still allowed to debate. You know, in other words, you're out of debate time, just as we're out of time before our break virtually, but they're out of debate time. But you can still bring up any number of amendments. And if you bring up an amendment, well, we'll give you 90 seconds to debate the thing, and then we'll have our vote on it. That's the position we're stuck in. We're still on the same reconciliation bill, that same one. So we're time limited. Amazing how these things come back to bite you. We'll talk more about that and other stuff after this next break. Welcome back once again to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll just let this music sort of play out, although maybe I'll lower it a little bit. Oh, I think I actually accidentally raised it on that. Anyway, I mentioned to you that, oh no, look at that. It played itself out. I don't know. I must have hit some kind of funky button that did that by accident. I'm pretty good. I wish I knew what I did on that. By all accounts, Donald Trump continues embarrassing himself in front of the United Nations, and the speech now devolving into the point where he says things like loser terrorists have to be killed. And I believe he has threatened the very existence of North Korea at least once. And, yeah, oh, look at this. Judd Legum says, Trump called Kim Jong-un Rocket Man in the speech to the United Nations. A real-life thing that actually happened in front of all of us, except not me. I wasn't watching, but sort of vicariously I'm watching. This was really rather amazing to watch this develop in real time. But I guess, I don't know, I thought they were going to tranquilize him a little bit better, and maybe he got to the end of his prepared remarks and is riffing a little bit. I don't know. We'll have to find out what was in the prepared remarks versus what he's doing. But he did mention that if North Korea were to develop nuclear weapons, we would have no choice. The United States would have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea, which really I don't think is the kind of thing that you want to say at the United Nations. They don't have a lot of friends at the UN, North Korea, but when you say things like America will totally destroy some other country in front of the UN, that's a sore spot for them. It makes them itchy when you do things like that. But, you know, he hates those guys, besides which he hates the tile that's behind him. And that's probably making him irritable. I wish it was pink or gold, perhaps. He loves gold things, yes, gold paint. But when it comes to marble, pink is his thing. Likes pink. Well, at least Ivana did. Maybe that's why there's so much pink marble in Trump Tower's lobby. All right, let's see. Is this real? Justice just sent me this thing. I saw David Corn tweet it. White House just sent out a press release announcing a new Department of Strategic Nicknames, and I don't know. It must be a joke about like Rocket Man and everything, but you can't tell. I don't know. Maybe they really did. I got no idea. But it certainly seems like something. I was gonna say it seems like something they would do, but I don't know that it really is. I don't know. He also misspelled White House. David Corn was working very quickly on this one. Two I's in White House. There is no I in White House. Yes, there is. There are two of them. I don't know. Anyway, strategic nickname. So man, they do need a better one than Rocket Man, right? I think that probably, by the way, Kim Jong-un probably likes that as nicknames go. I don't think he'd be insulted by that one. So let's see. More disturbing and piratical behavior out there. Where to go next? I'll put this one on record. It doesn't exactly fit in our narrative, but then again, I'm not entirely sure we have a narrative going on here today. New York Times did manage to save this one, but just, this one needs to be filed. It probably can fit elsewhere too. And maybe it is even piratical behavior, but file under Fox News is a sex cult, as the rest of Trump world and the alt-right are. But this one bearing directly on Fox News. Fox News guest says rape allegation blacklisted her. That's a good way to get kicked off of Fox. Prosecute the Fox hosts who rape you. Emily Steele has this story. The guest in question is Scotty Nell Hughes, who as I recall, was like something of a rabid Trump mouthpiece during the campaign. Not that, the two are related and that people ought to be raping Trump supporters. Clearly not the case, but it's bizarre. And it's going to come up in any court case, I'm sure, about these allegations. And it's not going to end up looking good. And it shouldn't impact, but I don't know. There's so many sides to this. If this is the person I'm thinking of, this is highly disturbing for a reason other than the fact that the allegation is one of rape, which is highly disturbing all by itself. Fox News, which for more than a year has dealt with the fallout from an embarrassing sexual harassment scandal, like 19 of them, by the way, was sued on Monday by the political commentator Scotty Nell Hughes, who claimed that she had been raped by the longtime anchor Charles Payne, about whom I know nothing. I have never heard of this guy, but he's an anchor, and was then retaliated against by the network after she came forward with her allegation. Mr. Payne, the host of Making Money on Fox Business, no idea, returned to the air this month after the network suspended him in July, pending an investigation into his conduct. I guess they're done now. Upon his return, the network said that it had completed the investigation, which began after Ms. Hughes took her allegations to the network in late June. Mr. Payne's lawyer, Jonathan N. Halpern, said in a statement on Monday that his client vehemently denies any wrongdoing and will defend himself vigorously against this baseless complaint. We're confident that when the evidence is presented in this case, Mr. Payne will be fully vindicated and these outrageous accusations against him will be confirmed as completely false. That's a great sentence, by the way. You might want to work on that one. In her lawsuit, Ms. Hughes said that Mr. Payne had pressured his way into her hotel room in July 2013 and coerced her to have sexual intercourse with him, even though she had refused his advances by telling him no and stop. Well, those are the elements. According to the suit, Ms. Hughes was shocked and ashamed and did not immediately report the episode. Understandable. She said that over the next 2 years, she was forced to engage in a sexual relationship with Mr. Payne. In exchange, she said she received career opportunities, including increased appearances on Fox News and Fox Business, and the promise that Mr. Payne would help her land a contributor contract, a job that can pay several $100,000 a year. Ms. Hughes never became a paid contributor at either channel. I don't even know what to say. That's disturbing also, but the rape is the bigger story. They're going to make it, of course. This is the way rape prosecutions and defenses go all the time. The defense will say you were trading sex for a job, which, well, maybe not what, the most moral thing to do in the world. Doesn't that make it not rape? If you were if you were engaged in a sexual relationship in which you had no particular emotional interest, but you were doing so in the hopes that you would raise your professional profile, you can do that, and he can do that with you, even though it's but it's not real. Of course, it's sexual harassment at minimum, because of course he holds leverage over you. It's not like you can do that. You could make that decision to enter into that situation and say, you know what? I understand that this is how they work, but I'm okay with it, so I'm going to go do that. That would be a little different than saying, oh, you're just a news channel and I'm a news person and I'd like to work here, and then finding yourself, in a situation where Roger Ailes or anybody else is saying, well, I can get you that job and get you that money if you have sex with me. That's problematic. We don't want that. And then, of course, if he forces his way into the hotel room and forces the sex on her, well, then we're talking about rape. This is back in 2013. And I guess what's amazing is, am I wrong about this? Is this not the name of the person who made numerous appearances on Fox Air to push the Donald Trump perspective on things? Now, granted, I don't think she was on the air with Charles Payne, but she doesn't get the sense that, at some point, that this network is all about this. Why am I doing this? I have difficulty separating these things. Luckily, we have a court system, which I'm very much in favor of, that is all about separating such things and can deal with the rape allegations as rape allegations and leave the rest of it largely out of it, or at least those will be the instructions. Whether or not the people are able to separate that, I guess I can't blame them if they can't separate it, if I can't separate it, but nobody deserves this. But I don't think that Scotty Nell Hughes is a smart person about maybe anything, but you can't rape her. There you go. Bottom line, that's all I can tell you about that. But I don't think she has handled any of this well, and I hope that with respect to the rape allegations, that doesn't get in the way of proving that lots of people at Fox News are criminal sex cultists and are doing terrible things and getting away with it regularly. And it might even be their chief motivation for entering into the business, not delivering news and commentary. They just know that delivering news and commentary is something that gets done on TV. People that want to be on TV generally are attractive people and ambitious people. And I might be able to leverage that into a lifetime of weird or illicit sex, or maybe both, which would be great for people who like weird sex, as defined by me. Other people might think it was entirely normal. Then again, maybe not. But I think that's what Fox News was chiefly about. And like McDonald's just being an operation to pay the rent on the various real estate locations they own by selling enough hamburgers to raise that money, Fox News airs news so that they can generate the revenue it takes to maintain their sex club and try and keep it quiet on top of that, plus pay for a couple of private jets and swimming pools along the way. You got to be able to offer the sex objects enough money to keep them there, too. So there's got to be revenue enough for all of that. I don't know what to make of this, other than it certainly seems like there's a lot of this going on. Here's a picture of Charles Payne on the set of, I guess, his show. You know, I don't recognize the guy, but okay, there he is. You can take a look at the article. We'll include it in our roundup for the day. Hughes was a regular guest on Fox News and Fox Business from 2013 to 2016. She asserted that after she ended the relationship with Payne, the network blacklisted her. After she reported her allegations against him, she said the network leaked the story to the news media about a romantic affair between Hughes and Payne. In July of 2013, she says, I was raped by Charles Payne. In July of 2017, I was raped again by Fox News. Oh, well, she's not taking the word all that seriously either, but okay. Since then, I have been living an absolute hell. And I would have thought you were in hell when you were doing what you were doing for Trump on the air, but apparently couldn't get enough of that. That's heaven for you. And, you know, I mean, I guess as long as Charles Payne wasn't around, maybe you felt more comfortable, but you didn't realize that the whole place was full of those people and that they'd be, you know, someone else was eventually probably going to rape you too. Because that's one of their habits, is passing people around. Once it gets out that you're susceptible to that, they all start doing it to you. I don't know. It's crazy, and it's crazy how often this stuff comes up, and how often these things are happening, and how often the women that it's happening to are coerced into staying around and continuing to provide the cover product for the sex cult. They're going to stay on the air and continue to provide things that look like news because, I don't know, man, Stockholm Syndrome, money, both. I have no idea. Let's skip down just a little bit here. The charges in Ms. Hughes' lawsuit echo accusations made by several other current and former Fox News employees after the sexual harassment scandal at the network burst into public view last year, exposing a culture where women said they had faced harassment and feared reporting inappropriate behavior. The initial scandal led to the resignation of the network's chairman, Roger Ailes, now dead, thank God. I added that part. And subsequent allegations prompted the network to force out its most popular figure, Bill O'Reilly, among other personalities. Fox News' parent company, 21st Century Fox, has attempted to clean up its workplace. That's what like Jared and Ivanka. They attempted to clean up the Trump administration, but it's just not working. And move past the crisis, yet new allegations and litigation have continued to roil the network in recent months. Because it's a sex cult! You can't clean a sex cult. Ms. Hughes, 37, has been a familiar face on cable news in recent years. A vocal Trump supporter, she worked as a paid contributor at CNN during the 2016 presidential election. Her contract with CNN ended this past January. If it wasn't going to do so much harm to her case and possibly be an active defense to the lawsuit, I would say that maybe Scotty Nell Hughes is either a glutton for punishment or doesn't know what she's doing, putting herself in these situations. A Trump supporter that seeks a continuing contract at Fox News is like, unfortunately, this reduces to, she was asking for it, did you see what she was wearing? I can't say this comfortably, but mamas, don't let your babies grow up to be Fox News commentators or Trump supporters. I don't know what to tell you. Don't get involved with these people. But then sometimes people are misled, or they enter into this thing as damaged mentally in the first place, and they think this is what sex is, because this is what I've always gotten from the people that for whatever reason I find myself running with now. And I've never known any different because I've never worked anywhere where there wasn't a sex cult and people weren't trying to leverage me into sex. And maybe that's just because there's men everywhere you go. I don't know. I mean, how else do you explain it? Sorry, I try not to do that. I have my limitations, right? Okay, so everybody should, what can I tell you? I don't know what's wrong with these guys, but they get away with it. And so they continue it, all right? And if to the extent that sex is a natural drive and everybody wants to have as much of it as they can possibly feel like they can get away with, if they live a lifestyle where they actually can get away with it, I assume they're going to continue doing it. That's why people build sex cults. They want to have a safe space in their mind where they think they can continue to get away with it. If you're just walking down the street grabbing women, generally speaking, that's going to get you in trouble unless you're extraordinarily rich. Maybe money is a sex cult too, isn't it? Why not? Might as well discuss that. There's another show for us. We'll have to put that one aside. I feel terrible about this story. I feel bad for this woman because here's what I can do. I can find sympathy for her by saying I really think she was doomed from the start and fell that easily into Fox News and Trump world because she had been abused for some time. That's my best guess. I really don't know what to make of this thing. I don't know how this case is going to come out. And it can't be the case that we continue to let these guys off the hook because they're all asking for it. You're building a trap for people that they'll fall into and that you can say they were asking for it, that you can't continue to profit from that. I'm very upset and annoyed by that. I don't know what else to say. Two more stories, I guess, that we'll try and cram in before closing things out and handing things over to the guys on the after show today. One about, we'll make it a quick one so that we can explore this other one. The other one is a little bit more unknown and might have good stuff in it, might not. I don't know, but it's a lurid headline, so we'll make room for the lurid headline. But first, more NBA culture and the occasional win against it, I guess. AEI, which is not usually a reliable source for anything, has this one here. I thought this was interesting anyway. Mark Perry, about whom I know nothing, but occasionally AEI has some people that are admirably middle of the road occasionally. Here's a story. Warren Buffett wins $1 million bet. That's good. I mean, he wins $1 million bets all the time, but this is an actual bet made a decade ago that the S&P 500 stock index would outperform hedge funds. It's just a little lesson for us in piracy and where and how people steal money and who can tell that they're doing it. Warren Buffett can tell. Long story short in this one, at some point back in 2007, Warren Buffett challenged finance professionals in the hedge fund industry to accept a bet that Buffett described in his recent, in his 2016 letter to shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway. And here's the excerpt of it, that back in 2005, in Berkshire's annual report, he says, I argued that active investment management by professionals in aggregate would, over a period of years, underperform the returns achieved by rank amateurs who simply sat still. In other words, I will make it long story short. He bet that if you bought a random S&P 500 driven index fund and just sat on your money, you would, in the end, in the end, net, come out better than if you bought into a hedge fund. And part of the reason is that hedge fund managers don't necessarily know a goddamn thing about what they're doing. They just have suits and people trust them because look at how fancy that suit is. And two, this is the real part, hedge fund management fees. That's why do hedge funds make so much money? Hedge funds don't make so much money. Hedge fund managers make lots of money. And when they make lots of money, investors think, look how much money you made. You must know something. And it's not that they invest wisely. It's that they extract to the extreme. Hedge fund managers take much more in fees out of their investors than regular rank amateurs like perhaps you and one day maybe me, investing in stuff. I don't understand this thing. Give me the S&P 500 index fund. It earns a couple % a year. I'll take it. What ended up happening was he got somebody to take the bet. And basically the bet was you can pick your top 5 hedge funds, any 5 you want, including funds you manage. And I'll pick one S&P 500 index fund, and we'll match them up against each other. Anyway, net, after the fees were extracted, the returns to investors they called the bet off after 9 years because they were getting crushed. But it looks like the 10-year thing is going to end up being about 7% annual return for the S&P 500 index fund versus net about 2% annual return from the hedge fund. The hedge fund manager made a considerable amount more than that, but hedge fund investors only got about 2% versus the 7% from that. That's just, I think we probably all would have guessed that secretly Warren Buffett was right about that, but it took an actual challenge like this in order to illustrate the things so clearly that, at least this one hedge fund manager was honorable enough to say, yeah, you know what? I lost and a year early. He said, I lost and it's over. I concede the bet. Very interesting. And just a great wrap up to the pirate theme for the day. Now, over to the lurid story that probably will edify us not at all, but titillate us to some extent. And that's important because after all, this show is a sex cult. The Guardian has a report by John Swain, just a day or two old here, headlined, Trump in Moscow. What happened at Miss Universe in 2013? That does sound lurid, doesn't it? Let's just take a quick peek at this and see if there's anything we want to mine out of it. Sitting in a makeshift studio overlooking the Moscow River on a crisp day in November 2013, Donald Trump pouted, stared down the lens of a television camera, and said something he would come to regret. Asked by an interviewer whether he had a relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin, the brash New York businessman could not resist boasting, I do have a relationship with him, Trump said. Russia's strongman had done a very brilliant job, Trump told MSNBC's Thomas Roberts, for declaring that Putin had bested Barack Obama. He's done an amazing job. He's put himself really at the forefront of the world as a leader in a short period of time. Trump, a teetotaler, seemed intoxicated by the buzz surrounding the glitzy event that had brought him back to Moscow. Back to Moscow, yes. That year's installment of the Miss Universe contest that he then owned. 4 years later, he is struggling to shake off the hangover. The 2013 pageant has become a focal point for the simultaneous investigations led by special counsel Robert Mueller and congressional committees into whether the associates of Trump colluded with Russian officials to help them win the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Investigators are examining closely efforts apparently made by the Russian government to pass Trump's team damaging information on Hillary Clinton using Trump's politically connected Miss Universe business partners as couriers. Yes. They are also looking into the $20 million fee that Trump collected for putting on the pageant from those same business partners, along with extraordinary allegations about Trump's private conduct behind closed doors at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, P-tape, during his 2013 stay in Moscow. The Guardian has learned of additional, previously unreported connections between Trump's business partners on the pageant and Russia's government. The ties are likely to attract further scrutiny by investigators who are already biting at the heels of Trump associates. A full accounting of Trump's actions in the Russian capital as that autumn turned to winter may be critical to resolving a controversy that has already consumed the first 8 months of his presidency. Our committee's investigation will not be complete unless we fully understand who President Trump met with when he was over in Russia for Miss Universe and what follow-up contacts occurred. Eric Swalwell, a California Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, said in an interview. Trump's attorney, one of many, John Dowd, declined to answer when asked whether the president's team accepts that the Miss Universe contest is a legitimate area of inquiry for investigators. Fake news, Dowd said in an email. But what did he say at lunch? That's the real question. Look who's come to see me. That's not what he said. But that is the beginning of the next section. It was a whirlwind courtship. Trump was instantly taken with Aras Agalarov, the billionaire owner of the Crocus Group Corporation, when the two wealthy property developers met for the first time on the fringe of the Miss USA contest in Las Vegas in mid-June 2013. We know all about that, of course. After just 10 minutes of discussion, Trump was showing off his new friend. He clapped me on the shoulder, gave a thumbs up, and started shouting, "Look who's come to see me. It's the richest man in Russia," Agalarov recalled to a Russian magazine later that year, before clarifying that his fortune, estimated at about $2 billion, was far from Russia's biggest. Don't insult Putin that way. The meeting had been set in motion only months earlier when Agalarov's son, Emin, the pop singer, well known in Eastern Europe, it's claimed, filmed his latest music video in Los Angeles. His co-star was the reigning Miss Universe, a casting choice that brought the Agalarovs in contact with the Trump's beauty pageant division. The idea of hosting that year's contest in Russia was raised over dinner by Paula Shugart, the Trump's top Miss Universe executive, according to Emin Agalarov. In a little notice interview published in July, Emin said the Trump organization seemed to be in need of the money that Moscow could offer. We have a lot of debts, he quoted Shugart as saying. Miss Universe denies that Shugart said this. In any case, the price tag of $20 million to be paid by Agalarov in return for Trump bringing the Miss Universe contest to Russia was quickly agreed upon. Several Democrats have raised concerns that the payment, like the billions in bank loans he secured to bring himself back from the brink in the early 1990s, may have left Trump indebted to foreign influences. Do we think so? Well, that's about all the time we'll really have to read from this article on today's show, but it's getting more and more interesting, and there's lots more left, and I may have to read it off the air and see if there's anything really super juicy, but you can actually read it for yourself and beat me to the punch. We can tweet about it all the rest of the day while we're complaining about the rest of the things that Trump does in front of the entirety of the world over at the UN. It is now time, however, to hand things over to the guys on the after show, batting cleanup, and I'm sure there's a lot of cleanup on aisle 6, 7, 8, 9, all the aisles that we can leave to them on this one. And of course, coming up next, let's see, this among other things, the Trump administration has removed taxpayer-funded climate data from the United States Geological Survey website. Great move, I'm sure. The Trump White House has suppressed a federal study from July showing refugees would contribute $63 billion to the economy over the next decade. And more than half of all American adults lack the basic knowledge to understand current events. That's thematic right there. What would you need to understand current events? Facts? Well, to hell with those. Let's suppress as many as we can. For the last half, they'll be visiting with Chris Reeves, a.k.a. Tom Servo 433, for a discussion on a small-town Kansas sheriff who quit over a town council-mandated traffic ticket campaign. And I'll tell you about more coming up after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
It's a Kansas thing, the second half, because Chris Reeves will be there. Betsy DeVos gets an icy reception outside of a Kansas community college. Chris Kobach's attempts to skirt the law is obviously totally insane, and the acquittal of a St. Louis police officer leaves the community outraged, but not stunned. All that coming up next.